There are indeed tangible and substantial benefits for organizations who embrace a diverse culture and infuse individuals with disabilities into their workforce. According to Statistics Canada, they're twice as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, three times more likely to be higher performing, six times more likely to be innovative and agile, and eight times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. Mike Mack is the president of X5 Management, whose rallying cry is aligning teams to achieve. He knows all about diversity, equity, and inclusion at work. And he joined me this week to provide his insightful insights on the importance of the observance of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, which we continue to observe this October. Because after all, engaging in conversation about this consequential topic opens up the floodgates of opportunities for an underserved yet talented segment of our population. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. So, Mike, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to learn all about X5 Management, the mission behind the company, and our discussion this morning about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Great to be with you this morning, and thank you so very much for being here.
Absolute pleasure.
And Mike, I know that the mission behind X5 Management is to align teams to succeed. So I'm wondering if you can tell me all about the mission behind the company and what it means to you, buddy.
You bet. Well, thank you, Kevin. As you may have seen on social media, a proud time in our company history because we've just celebrated our 15th year in business as of October, and reflecting on that statement and vision of aligning teams to achieve. And we always say we're in the people business. That's what we do. That's what it's all about. And there's a multitude of things that we focus on in that regard in our training, coaching, consulting lane. But a couple of really key things that we hope that our clients gain the most benefit from is that their employees become more engaged, love what they do to a greater extent. We put a lot of hours in a work day, a career, so we want them to enjoy that. Hopefully have some fun along the way. And from a corporate perspective, we want our clients to be able to retain good people so they're doing meaningful work. So we really from the C-suite to the front line, we really love to roll up our sleeves and work with any member of an organization that can benefit from our help. And I've been reflecting on this a lot, Kevin, with our 15th year anniversary, and can honestly say our team loves what it does today even more than it did, for example, 10 years ago. So we're on track, and we believe we're on purpose relative to living up to that mission, if you will.
Absolutely. Mike, 15 years in business is a tremendous feat and something to be tremendously proud of. So I'm wondering your thoughts on longevity in business and how to achieve that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, more reflecting on that today for sure. And I think, number one, you've got to pick your lane in that regard and doing what you do. In the early stages of our business, we had more things, if you will, on the list of services, but that's been tightened up a lot. Perseverance is just everything. Where, when the going gets tough, keep going. that pursuit we talked about earlier, pursuit of happiness. Well, that pursuit of what you hope to achieve, and that's always the advice that we provide even our clients as well, whether that's small business or an enterprise side, that that longevity is when the going gets tough, you get up in the morning, you keep to it. I think the other advice that I would really provide, and I'm grateful that I've done a way better job of that in the last 10 years, maybe even than I did in the first 5 of business, where there's a lot of great people out there, people like you, my friend Chad Griffiths, and many, many others, where you can get some insight and advice. You don't have to do everything by yourself, because the reality is most business owners and entrepreneurs and founders don't have all the answers. So those are some of the key critical components to longevity for sure. And notwithstanding major challenges of economic, COVID realities that we've experienced in the last 18 months have been impactful, and even greater challenges and adversity that business owners and leaders need to deal with.
And Mike, as a executive coach, speaker, and trainer, I'm also wondering your thoughts on the overriding lesson you hope to provide audiences when you speak to them.
Yeah, and there's a few key messages that we talk about along the way, relative to whether that's a workshop or a keynote in that example. And a couple of those lanes are obviously around the areas of customer service. We've spent a lot of time in that lane, but one that I'll talk to you today is obviously pertaining to the relationship side. That's always the message. You and I met and were introduced virtually. I hope that we can keep in contact for a very long time, maybe have the opportunity and privilege to meet you in person someday. But that's a message that I get up in the morning to serve every day. It's that relationships for keeps are just really key to business and in life. And that's one message of anything. If it's the only message I could ever provide to an audience, that would be that, because there's a lot of great people. I was at a small networking event in Edmonton last night, and even though there were only 30 people there or less, just relative to our current restrictions, if you will, just critically important to meet those individuals. Some of those people in that room I met last week, and some I met 15 years ago. So I think that's, keeping up with those relationships and investing the time, really a critical message that I try really hard to live and breathe every day of my life, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, mental health in business is also very, very important. And the frame of my next question has to do with defeating a defeatist attitude, because going through the pandemic, a lot of businesses have had to pivot or unfortunately shutter because they were unable to continue operation because of the pandemic. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how to defeat a defeatist attitude.
Yeah, I love that question, and it's a complex one at that. From my perspective, I've always been an optimist, but at the same time, I'm a realist, acknowledging that things can go wrong, versus sometimes the pessimist or the defeatist, where, oh, this will never work, this will never work. I am a big fan of controlling the controllable. I've accepted the fact that I can't control everything that happens to me in my life, personally or professionally. And as you can appreciate, Kevin, I'm certain, that you've got to have hope and optimism for things and control what you can, and believe in today is going to be a better day than yesterday more than anything. And that's by far easier said than done many a day. Well, that simple advice, harder to implement some days for certain, Kevin. I'd welcome your perspective on that, honestly, just out of curiosity, on your comment relative to defeating a defeatist attitude.
Mike, for me, I live my life by one simple motto, and that is inclusion is the gateway to independence. I think when you increase the tentative perspective that you draw from, it's easier to defeat an attitude of failure or feeling defeated. So that would be my answer.
Wow, excellent. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on the importance of mentorship in business. I know for you, a large part of your makeup personally is making sure that people succeed in and outside of the office. So I'm wondering your thoughts on the importance of mentorship in business and how we can achieve that effectively.
I love that question, and I'm a big fan of mentorship. And while I've been grateful to have many great mentors in my life over the years, and I've mentored people as well. A couple of things come to mind. Number one, the mentors that I've had in the past, while they evolved from a friendship, and they're generally had been older than me, not necessarily the case in all mentorship, but they did a great job of influencing what deep down I probably knew I needed to do in the first place, and they pushed the right buttons in that regard. I think if we embrace mentorship, and we become mentored by someone that is perhaps wiser in a certain area than us, I think the other aspect that we both have, both parties need to be really open about, is just this level of vulnerability based trust, that you are sharing a lot of things with this particular individual, and sometimes they'll give you insight that may not be comfortable or something that you really like to do, but deep down you may know you need to do it. I recommend that everybody should have a mentor or two at any given time in their life, and I'm grateful to still have that today. And I've referenced one of them, well, two of my past mentors in my books that came out, and one sadly had passed away a few years ago, but the other one is still in my life, lives out of Vancouver, and still keep in close contact. Less frequent contact, mind you, but there's still always that tight relationship that we've enjoyed over the past 17 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, as you know, from doing your research on me, I was born with cerebral palsy, and a lot of my work outside of this podcast is creating avenues of inclusion for folks with disabilities. It is, October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So I'm curious to get your opinion on the importance of infusing individuals with disabilities into the workforce, and how we can create more avenues of inclusion for folks with disabilities to work.
Yeah. First of all, Kevin, I really admire all that you've achieved in your life with your own adversities and challenges, and just admire that incredibly positive attitude, and what you bring to every conversation. It's such an important question, and I'll be the first one to admit, I think there's always so much more room for all of us as Canadians across the country to, we'll say, creating better awareness. I think, building meaningful relationships with advocates such as you, so I can better appreciate how we can best support that. I did have involvement with that in Edmonton over the last number of years, where through even my Rotary Club from many years ago, where we had a real focus on that inclusion component. And the reality, it should be just an ongoing journey forever and ever, not a project, if you will. So I think leaders like you across the country need to, continue to educate simple folk like me in terms of how we can continue to do a better job of that. From my perspective, while I operate a small business, I think there's always great ways of looking at how could we, even in our small business, do a better job of that inclusion component. And maybe you can offer some words of wisdom on that today as well, which I'd really value.
Yeah, the biggest thing, and before I did this and dove back into journalism, I was the job developer for the YMCA here in Windsor. And the biggest thing for me, talking to employers, is the lack of education and the lack of the knowledge base of them knowing the positive benefits of hiring people with disabilities. Mike, I always told employers that people with disabilities have to pay taxes too, and that money doesn't grow on trees for people with disabilities, right? So,
right on.
Providing an avenue of fulsome opportunities for everyone to succeed, I think, is the key. And for me, it starts with an increase in the knowledge base and increase in education as well.
I 100% agree. I agree.
And Mike, I'm curious to ask you, how do you think we create positive and meaningful relationships in business?
Love it. That's a sweet spot question for me, Kevin. So that's a dream question in my lane. I always regard myself as a relationship person. And you know, from my perspective, you know, and I'll talk about it, and I reference it in my one of my books, Relationship for Keeps. But you know, for me, that fundamental guiding principle is like, respect, trust, LRT. So for me, every day I wake up in the morning, I want to be that likable individual. You know, if I want to be respected, I got to be that respectful person, regardless of who I'm talking to, even if at times that person's not being respectful back to me. And on the trust side, be that trustworthy person again and again. Like any good thing worthwhile, it's an investment. So a relationship is never a one and done. It's not a one night stand, if you will. It's an ongoing component that you need to nurture again and again. And you know, I reflect even during our 15th year anniversary with X5 of some of the people, you know, and you interviewed my friend Chad Griffiths recently, where we've been close friends for 17 years. We can pick up the phone and just pick up where we left off. So number one, we have to have the desire to want to do it. Simply is that, yeah, I'm a relationship guy, and it's not about all your connections on LinkedIn or otherwise, but are you willing to establish meaningful relationships that you're willing to invest in over time? Sometimes individuals can help me, and in turn, sometimes I can help someone else. Never keep score in that regard, Kevin. That's another key thing that I look at is, you know, if you helped me back in 2018, I'm grateful, and I want to be able to return the favor, but I'm confident that you're not necessarily putting a diary in place when that's happening, that you know you've returned the favor. It's a give and take relationship, and it's something that's critically important in life. You know, when somebody can pick up the phone and somebody can help you with a little effort, it's based on the fact that that relationship may have been established. I'll share a quick anecdote, if I may, with reference to my mentor. And he's referenced years ago, and we can apply this to many things in life, Kevin, but he talked about the concept of drop a pebble, chase the ripples. So if you think about that in a relationship, and while you and I were recently introduced, we might be surprised with ourselves, and in 5 years, how we potentially may have helped each other by simply keeping in touch. It's that simple drop of the pebble at the outset that could turn into bigger things. And bigger things don't necessarily mean monetary gain or otherwise, but it could be a deeper, meaningful relationship, collaborations, partnerships that may occur over time. So that's kind of the fundamentals of that I think is possible, but both parties need to be willing to participate in building that meaningful relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of building a meaningful relationship, Michael, in my view, is talking about business unity and creating a culture of acceptance for everyone's opinion and perspective to be valued. So I'll ask the question, how do you think we can establish a society where business unity is more effectively achieved?
It's a tall order, but I have a couple thoughts on that, Kevin. And again, great questions. I love that where you're drilling into these today, and I think it's value for everyone to be thinking about. For me, I have a bit of a framework because I deal with that really on a day-to-day basis in our business with the corporate clients that we work with and their team. You know, I have a philosophy of think win-win. So if you and I are going to collaborate together, what's the win-win? Now, for me, I always want to look at the other party's win first. I think that's critically important. So if you get into a corporate setting, regardless of who is sitting around the table or the water cooler, I think we need to be open to have a gain in a deeper understanding of how people can contribute. Really, what are their strengths versus what they may not be as capable at, and really embrace that. And I have to admit, from a personal journey, I've become a lot better at that over time, because people that weren't like me and how they thought, I have a greater appreciation because they have different insights than I would have offered, but that insight proved to be highly valuable of things that I otherwise wouldn't have thought of before. So we have to open our mind to that. And again, that's a journey, right? It doesn't just happen because you said you're going to start doing it. You've got to live it, breathe it every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, I know that you've referenced your books a couple of times. So I'm curious for you in terms of your written word work, what's the most powerful message or prevailing message you hope to convey through the books that you write, Bunny?
Yeah, I think a couple things, and thanks for referencing that. So as you recall, the first book was driven around customer service, so remarkable service. So maybe two different messages on the book. In that regard is always elevating the game, whether you're the clerk at a store or you're a big corporation. How can we be remarkable to do things that people would remark about in a good way? Now, we can apply remarkable in our life too beyond customer service. I think you're a remarkable man as well, and I look forward to deepening our relationship over time. On the other book, Relationship for Keeps, that written word really, as I alluded to earlier, is about the relationship for keeps of the longevity of the relationship. That's the theory. If I go back to social media and LinkedIn, for me, it was never about the quota of how many people I'm connected with versus how many people that I can build meaningful relationships. So I think those are kind of the two messages. I got a few more books in me that will evolve over time, but those were the key messages. And as you can appreciate, writing that first book is just being willing to be vulnerable and putting yourself out there and think, well, what if half the people that read it don't even think it's that good? You've got to accept that as well, obviously, and be courageous for sure.
Life is a journey, isn't it? Of peaks
Indeed.
and valleys and everything in between. So,
You
Mike,
bet.
I'm also curious to ask you about diversity in the form of a company culture. One of the things that I am personally, I guess, is a pet peeve of mine, really, is when employers put on the bottom of a job application that we're an equal opportunity employer, but don't actually follow through in
Hmm.
implementing the policy of being equal opportunities for folks with disabilities and other minority groups. So I'm curious to ask you, how do you think we can create and develop a diverse culture of business?
Well, a great question, and I think always, when you look at that at the bottom, is that just a checklist that we put it on there because we should, versus are we being intentional? So if you think about hiring with intentionality and that you genuinely want to have a diverse workforce. Fortunately, I'm seeing more and more of that today than perhaps I did 15 years ago. Um, Hopefully, that's intentional. What I see in that regard, as you can appreciate, that diversity is incredibly powerful for the long term. But the senior players around the table that make those type of decisions need to really, and I'll use the word, put your money where your mouth is, but be intentional about that. We're committed to building a more diverse workforce. Having said that, define that. What does that mean? And I think they need to do a better job of maybe taking a deeper dive on to that relative to their specific organization and culture. Culture is a great word and it's a big word, but we have a good culture. We have a diverse culture. Sometimes I question what does that actually mean? What is deemed even best practice from that perspective? Again, some organizations do a great job of doing more of that and doing more of the right things, and others need to take a page out of their playbook, if you will, to do a much better job of elevating the awareness of that too, first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, I know that we're both Canadian, so I'm fascinated to ask you, for you, what's the best part about being Canadian, Money?
Yeah, I love that, and I think the fundamentals of being nice Canadians, regardless whether we live in Ontario or Alberta. I was born and raised in Saskatchewan. Really proud of this country. I think we have a reputation on a global basis of being good people. There's many other great things about this country and the beauty of our lakes and mountains and prairies and so on. I was a farm boy originally, but I think the fundamentals line up to the people. We are by nature fundamentally good people. There's a bad apple in every crowd, but I think fundamentally that's something I'm most proud of. We could be anywhere in the world, and if we had that little Canadian flag on our luggage tag, I think we would get some love and attention because we're there, And I have to admit, I would suggest that some countries may not enjoy that same reception that fellow Canadians would, like you and I.
Yeah, there's power in democracy, isn't there?
Indeed.
Absolutely. And Mike, tell me, I'm also wondering your thoughts on how you want your personal or professional legacy to be defined there,
Uh,
Bun.
yeah, well, fortunately, I haven't thought too much about it yet because I'm a young man. Joking aside, I am in my 50s, but I think in the simplicity of that, Kevin, is I was a good guy that cared about relationships, and really, I talk about relationship for keeps and like, respect, and trust. I genuinely live those values every day, and that's really in its simplest state, and doing that unconditionally as well, where that nobody has to say I'm the smartest guy they ever met versus he was a nice guy. I really like that guy. I'd be at peace with that if that was the only legacy left behind, because as you well know, Kevin, it doesn't cost you anything to be a nice guy and to show up every day and maybe put a bright spot in other people's lives when otherwise they're a bit in a gloom and doom mode. That's what I want to bring every day. Simple, but I work really hard to do that consistently every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, finally, tell me if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that, buddy?
Well, there's a couple ways. Obviously, our website x5management.com. You and I are connected on my favorite business social media, which is LinkedIn. You can reach out, and if any of your listeners want to reference that, I heard you on Kevin's podcast, we would be happy to make that connection. And of course, my email is mike@x5management.com.
Fantastic. Mike, I really enjoyed our conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion and learning all about X5 management this morning. Your time, energy, and efforts on my behalf are most appreciated. And I want to thank you for being here this morning.
My pleasure, Kevin. And a couple things, just really, as I get to know you more and more, we had an introduction not that long ago, but just want to pass on my acknowledgement to the great things that you do as well. And I'm genuinely consider it a privilege to be on your podcast today. And I do intend to build a meaningful relationship for keeps with you, Kevin. So thank you again for the invitation.
Well, Mike, I always enjoy engaging in conversation. I want to thank you for the kind words and for being here this morning. It's most appreciated.
My pleasure, Kevin. Make it a great day.